forgive my tumbling around. Well, good evening. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. Now, is this loud enough? Can everybody hear me? All right, very good. Okay. I'm going to start off by a little in memoriam piece here about somebody who was mentioned in the memorial section earlier. I want to take a moment to mark the passing of a fellow Minnesotan and a man who was very important in my state, the 34th ID, as well as the United States of America. That's, of course, General John William Vesey, Jr. General Vesey passed at 94 years of age. That was this past August 18th. His military career spanned 46 years. Now that makes him the United States longest serving active military soldier. He got a start with the Red Bulls when he was a month shy of 17 years old. Now, of course, 18 is as you all know, is the age for getting into the Army, but even back in 1939. But Vesey lied about his age. He was mustered in with the 34th ID's 59th Field Artillery Brigade. He received a battlefield commission while he was a 21-year-old sergeant in Italy during the Battle of Anzio, 1944. And after the war, he decided to go ahead and continue in a career with the military. For the next 25 years, he was in a number of different combat brigades. 1967, he was a lieutenant colonel. He found himself in the very unusual position at that rank of servicing a howitzer as a cannoneer. This was during a brutal 6-hour battle in Vietnam, the So We Tre, and nearly 2,000 Viet Cong soldiers had partially overrun a remote U.S. fire base, Gold. And circumstances eventually in this battle required Vesey to grab up a grenade launcher. And he saw a number of Viet Cong enemy rocket launcher crews out in the field. He eliminated 3 of those rocket launchers. He was wounded in this action, and he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and the Purple Heart. Now, his career would take him on to, of course, become a 4-star general. He's our country's 10th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Ronald Reagan from 1982 to 1985. Now, after retiring, he was not finished. He became an envoy and for Presidents Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and he made repeated trips to Vietnam. And his task was to try to find out the fate of hundreds of U.S. servicemen who were still listed as missing in action or POWs. His efforts allowed the remains of roughly 900 American servicemen to be repatriated back here to the States. And also for a level of certainty that allowed the U.S. government to conclude officially that there were no more U.S. POWs in Vietnam. Now, I never had the pleasure of meeting the general. I did recently hear a rebroadcast of a 1997 interview with him. It was on Minnesota Public Radio. And I have to say, the man just had this delightful laugh. And it was clear that he was a fabulous storyteller. He related how he had already turned in his retirement papers. He and his wife had already taken out this huge loan. I think he said it was 19% loan back in those days, building a new house in Minnesota, a retirement home. Well, he was summoned by President Ronald Reagan, and he went in for a talk with the president. He said, "I want you for my chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff." He tried to explain to the president, you know, my wife is really looking forward to some downtime here. And he said, well, you go home, you talk with her. So Vesey went home and he finds his wife working in the garden. And the way he tells this, quote, "A tear came down her cheek and I put my arms around her and said, 'How do we get into things like this?' And she said, 'You lied about your age to get into the National Guard, and God is punishing you.'" And then he gave that wonderful laugh. So clearly a dear man and a tremendous asset to this country, and he will be missed. Now, talking about the book project. In the beginning of this project, I was asked by, actually it was more than one officer, as a civilian, what about this story interests me? Why do I want to tell this? And I think to answer that, I really do need to talk a little bit about the world I grew up in, the one that I was raised in. I came from a family of 4 rampaging boys. I was raised in the 1960s and through about the middle of the 1970s. Being the youngest of 4 boys, and my oldest brother, he's not quite 6 years older than me. Let's just say if they gave Purple Hearts for childhood, I'd have more than one. Blood was spilled. John Wayne, Sergeant Rock comic books, war movies, especially World War II. That was the stuff of my youth. When I was in kindergarten, the very first G.I. Joe toy was released, 1964. And of course, I and every other kid my age, I had to have one of these things. Unfortunately, my dad's opinion of this was, no son of mine is going to play with dolls. He did not buy into Hasbro Toy Company's marketing about, this is an action figure. And this has a very happy ending, I have to tell you. Fortunately, my grandmother, dear soul that she is, this is my dad's mother, she bought me one for my birthday that year. So I not only got my G.I. Joe, but I got my first taste of irony in life, even before I knew the word. One of my grandfathers was a doughboy in World War I. 2 uncles were combat veterans of World War II. And my Uncle Jack actually continued in the 45th Infantry Division of Oklahoma National Guard after the war for many years. Dad was in the Air Force during the Korean conflict, and another uncle was as well. So basically nearly every adult in my upbringing had been involved in either World War II or Korea, or both. And my Boy Scout troop, of course, was very heavily influenced by all of that military experience. That's back when I learned to march. You step off on the left foot. I learned that. And that was also, I think, when I learned that cadence chant about the girl who lives on a hill. That was not one of the adults, I'm sure. And then there was Vietnam. Now, in my memory, I kid you not, we were always there. First U.S. military advisor I found out was killed in Vietnam in 1959. That was the year I was born. The reporting on the war was continual on TV all through my upbringing. In the newspapers that my parents read, I assumed it was just going to continue, and I eventually would go. My 2 oldest brothers went through the draft lottery, 1971-72, but the drawdown was already beginning, so they were not called up. As an undergraduate at the University of Oklahoma, I had combat vets for classmates, guys coming back to school. Some of them were in the college's graduate program. I also had professors who were combat vets. So I got some very fresh, very first-person stories and perspectives on the war. And it confirmed something for me early on, what I had heard when I interviewed retired Colonel Michael Rapp, 34th ID for the book. He said, quote, "Limited warfare is a political idea, not a military idea." And I think we've certainly had some proof of that over time. I have always loved history, especially the American Civil War, military history in general, and the American West period, probably the John Wayne influence. I've always been a proponent of the idea that we can't know who we are or where we're going unless we know who we were and where we've been. And I have to say, every time I talk to young people and they show an interest in history, I have such hope in my heart. Because unfortunately, it doesn't seem like a lot of them do have an interest. I have also always loved and been involved professionally in communication and in storytelling. My master's thesis let me combine those two things, history and communication. I created a documentary film on the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry at the Battle of Gettysburg. The research for that led to a book, which Tim told you about, Pale Horse at Plum Run, on the same topic. And of course, we all know that 1st Minnesota is the progenitor of 2 of the 135th Minnesota National Guard. Yay.
To the last man.
To the last man. There's a story there too, come keep reading. So in a sense, my whole life has really been preparing for this book, when we get down to it. There's still plenty of things, though, that I have had to educate myself on. Unlike the structure of the Union's Army of the Potomac in 1863, which I've been accustomed to studying, modern U.S. Army's acronyms and the ever-shifting structure of the 34th ID since 2001, that's been quite an education. I've learned about LZs and hot LZs and even HLZs, not to be confused with hot LZs. One can have a ready fart and an attack fart and even a hot fart. We won't even go into fobs, cobs, cops, ticks, talks, AOs, ATs, ADTs, BCTs, or the possibility that an HVI is KIA by being at the POI, which is, of course, some distance from the POO, and I hope that like cob, fob, cop, that acronym is not pronounced poo. But someone can fill me in later. My research, I found that some information that included equipment that one unit had fielded and been trained on for an upcoming deployment. And that list included item, Trojan Spirit. Now, that immediately made me think of something my 18-year-old Uncle Jack might have been issued in World War II, along with his saltpeter laced mashed potatoes. The profit spiral. Okay, now, if Moses had been a high school student, I'm sure that's what he would have come down from Mount Sinai with instead of stone tablets. Okay, now I have to use my special voice for this one, all right? And it's going to be tough, one-handed. Command post of the future! Very Buck Rogers sounding. So, I thought sorting through the modular reorganization would be the death of me, but I think I have all of that pretty much in hand right now, and all the important acronyms sorted out. Ultimately, the most important thing to me, what really draws me to the research and to the writing about historical events, is the people who are involved, the individuals and their stories, their insights, their experiences, their perspective on what's happened and what they've lived through. And I have to admit, I have a bias for the stories for those that I've heard called the trigger pullers, or those who were once the trigger pullers. In terms of history, the generals, the grand strategies, the battles, the aftermath, that is always documented and recorded. That version always is there for future scholars to ponder and work through, reports, documents, endless books by other authors. And I have found that meeting many of the men and women of the 34th ID for research on this book, that the norm in the National Guard is, more often than not, that the officers were, early in their career, among the trigger pullers. Now, consider this bit of first-person observation. This is a narrative of one of your counterparts from 150 years ago. Charles Edward Davis, he joined the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry as a corporal in April of 1861, beginning of the war. He quickly rose to the rank of first lieutenant, and he was promoted to captain of Company E the day after the Battle of Gettysburg. And that was because every officer of that company had been killed or wounded. In a letter to his sister Belle, he writes about the night before an expected morning charge at Mine Run, Virginia. Now, this was in November of 1863, about 5 months after the 1st Minnesota had lost over 70% of its number of dead and wounded at Gettysburg. The men of the 1st were out front. They were a set of skirmishers, for in the morning they were facing another suicide charge. this time across 600 yards of uphill, open ground into an entrenched and fortified Confederate army. Davis writes about watching his friend, Captain Thomas Sinclair, who commanded the regiment's Company B. He had enlisted at the beginning of the war as a sergeant in the regiment. Davis wrote, quote, Captain Sinclair of our regiment, who was wounded at Gettysburg and Bristow Station, saw a pamphlet lying on the ground and picked it up. It proved to be a religious tract, and it was headed, Prepare to Meet Thy God. Tom looked across the level plain in our front, over which we must charge a full half mile under a tremendous storm of artillery and musketry before we could reach their works, and laconically remarked, Yes, I think it's about time. Many a brave soldier looked, as he supposed that morning, on the sun the last time. Now, mercifully, with the light of dawn, Commanding General George Gordon Meade of the Army of the Potomac, he called off this impending bloodbath before it even started. While interviewing soldiers who fought at the Battle of Doab during the year, the 2010-2011 Afghanistan deployment, I felt similar sentiments quickly closing out that century and a half of time. Christian Joan, a specialist at the time of the battle, was serving as an RTO and a grenadier in 2nd Squad HHC-1 of the 133rd Infantry. He was speaking of waiting before the helicopters arrived to fly them into Doab, and he said, quote, It felt completely wrong in your gut. And that was a universal sentiment that I found with the men who were preparing to fly out on this mission. It was something that most of them had not felt before other missions. Jung went on to say, referring to his Sergeant Joe Williams, quote, Just as we were loading onto the birds, Joe said, Pray to your God. And I'm like, well, he's never said that to me before. Another veteran of Doab, Sergeant Nathan Didier. He was an NCO for Intelligence Collection, Charlie Company, 1 of the 133rd. He said of that morning, quote, I had a daughter born 3 weeks after we deployed who I didn't really know. I had a bad feeling. I kept a journal to tell my daughter the story of what I did that day, and I wrote goodbye. I thought that was it. What I have found, both in my historical research and in my research for this book, is this existential cord that binds soldiers, the trigger pullers, together through time. This common, ordinary man or woman placed in an extremely extraordinary and uncommon circumstances. And it is that common soldier's reaction to those circumstances that is a continual marvel to civilians like myself. And I can't help but wonder how I would deal under similar circumstances. Now, I would say that at this point, with the research I've done, I have basically attained a PhD level of education in leadership, talking with soldiers from the 34th ID. I feel like Marco Rubio, I'm sorry. One of my earlier interviews was with Major Randall Stanford, who was with us tonight. He was a captain at that time, troop commander of one of the 113th Cavalry during this 2010-2011 Afghanistan deployment. And Randall's leadership philosophy includes not making anyone do something that he wouldn't do himself. And that really paid off, earning the ANA's cooperation and involvement. And that, of course, was essential to the success of the mission. That was to mentor and partner with the Afghan National Army. Early in the deployment, a rocket had been shot at Stanford and his men in their combat outpost, and they knew where it had come from. So they headed out there to the site, and of course, no one was there. But they did find an unfired rocket buried in the sand. And Stanford was just not about to leave this thing for them to use later on, the insurgents to use on him. He wanted to blow it up in place. Now, unfortunately, they didn't have the proper EOD, the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technician, with him, so he was not given permission to detonate that rocket. So he said, quote, and I'm not trying to do an imitation, Randall, I promise. I wasn't going to stay all night and potentially get attacked while waiting for a chopper to come and carry it off, and I wasn't going to leave it. He was determined to carry it down. And he wasn't going to ask his men or the Afghans to do it for him, so he lugged it himself. He said, quote, it was this big, heavy thing. We got part of the way down, and I could see the Afghans looking at me. And after I carried it the first half mile, I was dying. And one of my guys said, I'll carry it. And I felt like I'd done my leadership thing, so I said, okay. So I and the other guy, we switched back and forth because my other soldiers were saying, I'm not touching that. But the Afghans were finally like, I can't. So they carried it. And that's when I knew we had built that partnership. They were like, these guys are crazy. But I respect that. I'm going to do what they're doing. Now that is one of many lead from the front stories that I heard in my research for this book. I've also learned what one does for entertainment in the little bit of downtime you have on a remote deployment when it's 130 degrees in the shade during the day. Lieutenant Colonel Simon Schaefer was a young captain in the 2004-05 deployment to Afghanistan. He commanded Delta Company at 2 of the 135th from Minnesota, and they were attached to Iowa's 1 of the 168. Now, it seems whatever he and his men lacked in resources out in Farah province, there was no lack of camel spiders. And for those of you who haven't seen one of these hideous things, their body, it's about as big as a tarantula here in the state, but they have longer, skinny, snow crab-like legs. And these big, ugly pinchers on their mouths. And these things have been clocked at going 10 miles per hour, skittering across the sand. They are as aggressive as they are ugly. Now, hearing the story that Simon told me, I was reminded again of Civil War soldiers when they were trying to fill idle time. One Civil War veteran wrote after the war that a soldier in camp would bet on anything. They'd even set up louse races. And of course, there was no shortage of lice in a Civil War camp. Now, it's clear that the resourceful soldier will utilize whatever they have at hand. So the soldiers of Delta Company caught camel spiders. They dropped a couple at a time into empty ammo crates, and they had their own miniature gladiator arena. Of course, we know from history that Roman gladiators did not eat their opponents after they killed them. Another soldier in the 1 of the 168, who shall remain nameless because of this story, he was killing time with a group of fellow young soldiers in that same Afghanistan deployment. Now, while soldiers will bet on anything during the boredom of downtime, there's also always somebody willing to do something on a dare or on a whim, just to entertain his fellow soldiers. So this young fellow tells me, quote, we had this M203 rocket-propelled grenade launcher. We had riot control rounds for it, and they were like these hard Nerf foam projectiles. Well, there was a kid, another soldier, who said we could shoot him with one. Now, everyone pitched in $20 each. He puts on his armor, he puts down his visor, and the guy with the launcher shoots him in the leg. I mean, this thing was terrible. His leg was just purple. It took him down. But he made a couple of $100. Now, I wish I'd been that smart when I had asked for $20 each for my older brothers and my cousin when I was 7 years old, when I agreed to let them crucify me. I kid you not, they used ropes, well, no nail holes. Now, not surprisingly, the thing that I've heard universally in all my interviews is a deep sense of pride and service. and a bone-deep connection and camaraderie with fellow soldiers. Master Sergeant Ashley Sherrill was Staff Sergeant Ashley Olkis during the 2010-11 Afghanistan employment. She was a member of the HHC Public Affairs Team, the 2nd Brigade, 34th Infantry Division. On April 25th, 2011, she was at a tiny joint combat outpost, and she was doing reporter work for the Army News Service. She was covering the memorial ceremony for Staff Sergeant James Justice, one of the 113th Cav. He had been killed in action 2 days before. And she told me, quote, "It's so hard being in somebody's face who is obviously mourning someone. And we're all mourning because we're all wearing that Red Bull patch. You know? And having to extract these stories from them and then watch as the whole lot of them go through." And she trailed off and she paused for a moment. And then she said, "I think I felt like I was," and she paused again. And then she continued, "Although it was difficult, it was hard. People so much appreciated the imagery I captured for them after the fact. They got to see themselves with the memorial and they could take that away with them for later. So that was another instance of this is where I'm supposed to be. I was so proud that I joined the National Guard and was doing this. Even though it's hard, it's part of being in the Army." And I might add, she wrote a phenomenal story to go with those pictures she took. She's a hell of a journalist. Lieutenant Colonel John Cunningham, commander of one of the 194th Field Artillery, put it succinctly, quote, "There is truly no greater bond than with guys you have spent a year with, living with, fighting with. Their ups, their downs, things going on at home, you rely on that guy. He's got your left, he's got your right, and you've got his." First Sergeant Nicholas Jedlicka of the 168 said, quote, "You really get to learn a lot about somebody when you're stuck together. You're constantly together working. You learn everything about them. I mean, you're stuck in a truck together with 3 guys and you all go to the bathroom in front of each other in a bag. Things you really don't think of. Nobody wants to think of it. But that's how close you get to these guys. It's pretty amazing. You walk out, you see one of them in the hallway, and it's like, you never missed a beat. I could call any one of those guys and they'd be here." Sergeant First Class Michael Solman of the 2 of the 135th, he told me about his unit's experience on that bleak day that many of you experienced. Day in Iraq when they told you you'd been extended, and it became a long deployment. Alpha's company, the captain, Anton Dietrich, had called a company meeting for that night, and Sergeant Solman told me, quote, "He wanted everybody. We were all there, raggedy-assed, shorts, t-shirts, ripped out of bed or what have you. And he cocked his hat back and he said, 'Okay, look, we're being extended. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to get all of the bitching and complaining out of your system, and then we're going to get back to work.' And we all looked at each other, left and right, and nobody said a effing word. Then, 'Roger, sir!' And that was it. Flip the switch back on. We're getting the gun trucks back up and ready to go, and everybody in their heart was like, you know? But nobody said a word because we had each other. You know, it's like, keep us here as long as you want, as long as it's all of us. We've been doing this long, we'll just keep doing it. And that brings me full circle back to the 1st Minnesota. On that cold November night at Mine Run, Virginia, waiting for the dawn and that final charge. Long after the war, Orderly Sergeant James Wright of the regiment's Company F, he wrote about that dark, cold night and that morning at Mine Run. He summed up what I think is the legacy of the 1st Minnesota and every other unit of citizen soldiers throughout our history, from the earliest Minutemen and militias to today's National Guard. It's a legacy of fidelity. It's fidelity to duty and to brothers and sisters in arms on either side of you. Whether you're lying in a frozen trench on a dark Virginia night in 1863 or riding in an MRAP in a broiling Iraqi desert. He wrote of that night and of his comrades. It was a severe, long-continued test of the very finest qualities of soldiership, fortitude and endurance. And they bore themselves through it all with commendable readiness and steadiness. I recall no 6 hours of the history of the company or the regiment when held inactive where it bore itself more creditably. There was no display of heroics. None of us wanted our names on the casualty list. We all wanted to go home with a full complement of legs and arms. But we were there to meet the requirements of the occasion, and we were ready to do it, whatever it might cost. Now, getting to know so many of you from the 34th Infantry Division, it's clear to me that the tradition of service and sacrifice reaching all the way back to the Civil War is alive and well today. And for myself and my family, I want to thank all of you for your service to our country. I am so grateful to Colonel Russ Beerle and to all of you of the 34th Infantry Division Association to allow me to help tell a part of your story with this book. Thank you.
Brian, we have to go for you.
We aren't going to knight you now. Go ahead, take your seats. So just stand by here.
Yeah, we have some new 34th Infantry Division apparel here, new hats. And on behalf of the Division Association, I'd like to present you with this hat. It's a small token, and you nailed it. And I can't thank you enough for what you're doing for the book too and our history.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank all of you.